Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Paul Vigory. I work for Altisource. Today, we're going to be speaking with you from Hubzu, one of our business divisions, and Express Capital Financing. So we have an auction site and a lending provider with us today. So we're going to speak about how real estate auctions work, kind of give you some tips, some tricks, and a few secrets along the way. I'd like to introduce you to Mike Janston, my colleague who runs our marketing department at Altisource, Max Chera, who works for Express Capital, and Martin Chera, his father, from Express Capital. Thank you. Welcome, gentlemen.
Great.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
All right, so let's get rid of our faces here because we want to get into actual some guts here and talk about how auctions work. So here's what we plan to cover, and it's something that's going to hopefully get you interested in real estate investing, learning how auctions work, how you can finance those properties, and then we have a whole series of webinars that's coming after this. And depending on when you're watching this, because you might be watching on demand, some of those might already be recorded. So we're recording this one in November of 2022. And let's jump into it and talk about the different types of real estate auctions, how you find those properties online, how you determine the current value, and most importantly, the after repaired value of those properties, how you estimate your rehab, the registration requirements for auctions, whether they're in person or online, what a financeable property is versus cash only, and why that doesn't matter sometimes, and then some bidding strategies, and that's where we'll get a lot of the interesting tips and tricks. And then a little bit about the closing process, which can sound kind of boring, but these are real estate transactions. You're not buying something on Amazon. You can't click a mouse and buy a house. There's some paperwork that has to happen with these larger transactions. So let's talk about the different types of real estate auctions, because there's a ton of different real estate auctions and different types of properties and different statuses that those properties are in. There's non-performing loan auctions, right? These are loans that have gone bad, and the person who's holding that paper will sell you the paper. There's short sale auctions where the homeowner and the lender agree to sell that property to the high bidder, and the homeowner and the lender agree on that reserve price in the auction. There's a foreclosure sale where the bank is basically foreclosing on the homeowner because they haven't paid for their mortgage. And there's a bunch of different types of foreclosure sales. We're not going to go deep into that in this webinar, but we will in a future webinar, because there's judicial states and non-judicial states, and there's trustees that do some of these, and sheriffs, and it's different in every state, trust me. CWCOT properties, these are HUD properties. This is when the government's insuring a loan and they're the one that's directing the sale. There's a couple different versions of that, and that's something that we're going to go really deep in another webinar as well. And this stands for claim without conveyance of title. It basically means that HUD insured the loan and the loan went bad, and they're selling that house at the foreclosure sale or afterwards. That's your first chance and second chance. And they don't want to hold the title to it. They just want it to sell before they have to own it, right? Those are really interesting auctions. Then there's bank-owned auctions, also called REO, which stands for real estate owned. It's a weird term, but just on a balance sheet for a bank, it says like, hey, here's our real estate that's owned, and that's why they call it an REO, not from REO Speedwagon. And then there's wholesaler properties. These are people who get properties under contract, and then they assign that contract to someone else at closing, or they buy it and sell the contract to you. Some of those properties are online as well. And then you have tenant occupied, where an investor is selling a property with a tenant, and then a regular arm's length deal. And this can be a homeowner or an investor that's selling a property. Usually they're going to move right out of it. Sometimes and I've seen this a lot lately, is the homeowner wants to sell the property and stay in it and be your tenant. But that's also considered an arm's length kind of sale. So those are the different types of properties you'll find in real estate auctions. Some of those are live in person, but most of them end up in online auctions these days. Where do you find properties? I personally think the best place to find them is on Hubzu.com, because that's one of the Altisource companies and a platform that aggregates all those different types of real estate properties. And a little secret for me, I bought a house on Hubzu in 2016, and I made a ton of money on it, actually. I rented it for a couple of years, and then I sold it. I wasn't working for Hubzu at the time, so I'm not out there bidding against you. Don't worry about that. But I found it a great platform to buy a real estate property, and I was very successful on the one I did. I'm a smaller time investor, not one of the big institutional guys. But let's go on to Hubzu right now and see what it looks like. So here's Hubzu. I'm not going to tell you how to search a website. Everyone knows how to do that. But there are different categories within here where you can type in an actual state and it'll give you just those states' properties. Or you can type in a physical address or a zip code or something like that, and it'll give you everything that's in or nearby those things. But on Hubzu, there's different categories. I like to look at all auctions because you want to look at all the opportunities and then narrow it down by certain criteria. Bank-owned properties, I'll click on this one right now, but all those different categories are in here, even non-performing loans. And this will show you the 903 properties that are bank-owned auctions right now. I selected one in advance that we can look at, but there's ways to filter this down, right? So if you look at property status here, you can look at the newer properties, you can look at active, ones that are under contract. You might want to save a property that's under contract if it looks good to you, because it might fall out of contract, and then you can see that in an auction. All of these auctions on Hubzu run in 7-day intervals. So the first day that a property comes onto Hubzu, 7 days from then, that's when that first auction ends. And so you can see these different properties have different durations because the auctions end Monday through Friday. So this one ends in 7 hours, this one's in 4 hours, and this one's 2 days and 20 hours. You can zoom in on this map and find where they are geographically as well. And it'll change your search results based on what geography you're looking at. But most of these things are pretty easy to figure out if you're just looking for a geography for a property. The real action comes in when you find one of those properties. Here's a regular REO bank-owned property that you'll find on Hubzu. This is probably a great investment opportunity. It's in Texas. It's got a starting bid of $73,000. It's a good looking house there. It looks like it's got some good bones. One of the things I like to say, if it looks good on the outside, it probably looks good on the inside. Maybe not so good, right? But these are fix-up properties that you're going to turn into rentals, or you're going to build that sweat equity and sell them. And that's where your leverage comes into play with our finance partners. You're going to want to, when you buy this property, you're going to want to put leverage on that property so you can go and buy another property as you're rehabbing this one and finance the rehab as well. So we'll get into some of the details on that in a second. But this is a property where if I wanted to place a bid, you might think it's simple, right? You go onto eBay, you go into the box, you place a bid for $5 on something and someone outbids you and then you bid $7. Or even a car, you bid $22,000 on the car and someone bids $23,000. It's a little more detailed in a real estate transaction and when you're in an auction. We need to know who you are, so you need to complete a profile and have an ID check. We verify you as a user. We verify your funds. Here's my account right here. I can upload my bank account statement or a money market account or whatever my proof of funds are for this property to show that I have the money to bid on the property. You don't have to have all $73,000 in that account. You just have to show that you have cash to cover about 5% of that property. My contact information, and then you need to register for the property with a credit card. We put a hold on it. We don't charge the credit card. It could be $500 to $2,500 depending on the value of the property. And then you're authorized to bid, and you can go and bid in this auction over the next 2 days and 23 hours. It doesn't sound very complicated. It is a few steps, but it's to ensure the security of the auction, the legitimacy of it. Just like in a poker game, if you want to play in a poker game, you have to buy chips with dollars, and then you can, play in that poker game. It's a similar thing in an auction. You don't want to be bidding against some kid that's just playing on Hubzu, right? You want to be against bona fide other investors and home buyers that have legitimate funds that can bid in those auctions. And we like to make the marketplace as secure and even to everybody who's in the auction. So let's go back to our presentation here. That's basically how you find homes on Hubzu and how you bid on them. One of the things you're going to want to do before you start placing bids is you want to determine the value of those properties. And there's a lot of different places that you can go and find information. You know, the one that pops out here the most is Zillow, right? Everyone's been on Zillow. It's one of the websites in the world that has one of the most traffic to it, you know, I think it's a top 10 website on the planet, right? And they have their estimates on there, and that's a great place to start. Go in and look at there. They have some comps on those pages. But if you want to get a little more detailed, you can go on to equator.com. That's another AltaSource company. Or we have a company called NestRange where you can do property valuations. We run promotions from time to time. If you register and reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'll make sure you get 5 credits on NestRange just for watching this webinar. I think we charge $20 a report for those. But it's a property valuation that looks at up to 150 different comps. And then lets you go in and select the comps that you think are the most relevant if you didn't like the ones that were selected, and you can revalue those properties. I got a quick example here. Here's the NestRange site. This was the property that we were looking at here on Hubzu on Walters Boulevard. I typed it in, and we can do an advanced valuation. And see, it charges $10 for the advanced valuation report there. I could put in my credit card. And basically what you end up with, this is a different property I pulled up, is the value of a specific property. There's a property in California in Orange County. It's got a pretty high value there at 1.6 million. But it creates this report that you can work with your lender, like Express Financial, to say, hey, here's the after repaired value I'm looking on this property. If we went back to NestRange here, you can also run this report. Well, I can't find it now. I think I went away from my search page, but it lets you do a distressed value on there. But it's a great report, kind of like a Carfax report, for, you know, if you want to find out if a car's been in an accident. This gives you the value over the last 10 years, and has all the comps that you selected on NestRange to come up with the valuation for this property. And it looks at properties that are currently on the market for sale and properties that recently sold, and it dynamically comes up with that value. But there's other products like that on the market as well. You want to determine that valuation because you're also going to want to figure out, you know, what it's going to cost to rehab. That property I just showed you in Orange County probably doesn't need much rehab, maybe some touch up on the paint, maybe it needs an appliance or two, who knows. That could be a pretty cheap rehab. But there's places you can go to get information on what it's going to cost to rehab. I like the resources that Express Capital Financing has. If we go over to their site here, they have some great resources here: a deal calculator for fix and flip, a rental property calculator, and these are really detailed. Calculators that you can figure out what you will pay for a property and what your financing costs will be, and you can put in what your rehab amount is here in your renovation budget, how soon you want to flip the property, all these different expenses that can come up in a real estate transaction. These are fantastic resources. Another one is the property walkthrough checklist. I actually opened it up over here. This is as you're walking through the property, like you can do your own estimates and fill this out and come up with your cost. And it has all the different things you need to think about. And hey, you might not think about, hey, does the exhaust fan work? They're all the details are right here, on Express Capital Financing site. So I think that's a great resource for determining an estimate of what that rehab is going to be. But bigger pockets, they have a deal calculator that has rehab data in it. I think they let you do 2 or 3 free ones before you have to sign up with bigger pockets. Houseflippingspreadsheet.com is one I came up with that I found. They have a repair estimator that's pretty good. And then, hey, there's Microsoft Excel, right? You can do it yourself. I would probably take this form from Express Capital and drop it into Excel because I love going through Excel and making up my own formulas. But one tip you want to do is you want to overestimate by at least 10% to account for unforeseen expenses. Registration requirements. I talked to you a little bit about that earlier, registering for a property online. But if you're at a live auction, you usually have to show up with an ID and cashier's checks. Those sheriff sales happen out on the courthouse steps. And if you're in New Jersey, you have to pay 20% today. But if you're in California and it's a trustee sale, you have to pay 100% today in cashier's checks. So you have to have your ID and you have to have the cashier's checks. Online, I already told you those steps with ID verification and the deposit with your credit card. That's just a hold. But those things are pretty simple. We talked a little bit about financial properties versus cash only in the outline at the beginning. I'm going to pass this over to Express Capital to talk a little bit about these different options. Because cash only in an online auction doesn't really mean you have to come with your own cash 100% at the end of the auction. There's different ways that you can use a bridge loan to do that as well.
You want me to take it there or you? So when it comes to financing, there's a lot of different options on how you could go about taking over a property, right? So there's one that everyone is probably the most familiar with, which is your conventional loan, right? That's when you go to your standard bank, you're putting down approximately 20% down, and you're going to go through the bank's guidelines in order to qualify for that property. And the property also would have to qualify, right? Another very common and more common nowadays in financing is you're going to see bridge and private lenders, people like ourselves at Express Capital, right, where we offer capital for the purchase of the property, capital for the renovation of the property, right? That's something that you're not going to get from a standard conventional loan. They want your turnkey properties. They're stabilized today as is, and they can cash flow the way they are. Whereas bridge is more open to scenarios where the property is not stabilized, and we are trusting you, the investor, to stabilize the asset and get it to perform and cash flow positive. These are also a lot easier to qualify for than your standard bank loans because they're more common. There's a lot more common sense underwriting to it and making sure that the deal makes sense, right? And not only are you getting an easier to do loan, but you're also getting somebody else to review your numbers and make sure that whatever it is that you came up with makes sense in their eyes also. And keep in mind, we are looking at hundreds of deals a day. So we really get to see all the good, the bad, and the ugly of what's going on in the industry, right? Now, additionally, there's another really good way to go about financing your deals. And this is the unconventional way of getting your stabilized assets, right? So you found a property today that maybe it has a tenant in there, or you could get one in there tomorrow. No work has to be done to it. And you want to take it over, but you don't need bridge financing, right? You want a 30-year product. Well, now you have what's called a debt service coverage ratio loan, right? We call it our rental 360 product because it's your everyday product. And with these, you're generally going to be 20% down. The way we look at these is making sure that the asset itself can cover its payments, right? So for example, just for easy, simple math, if my principal, interest, taxes, and insurance comes out to $1,000 every single month, the property should be bringing in approximately $1,200 a month in order to cover the ratio, right? We want to make sure that it's going to cash flow positive. So that's how we look at this. And we're going to break down, by the way, all these options a lot further in our future series. The goal today is just to kind of get you guys acclimated and familiar with the different options that are out there for you in the market. Now, when you're looking at occupied versus vacant properties, guys, I mentioned it a little bit before when I was saying bridge versus permanent, which one's right for me. Well, that's where we're going to go in further as well and kind of give you different strategies that are available, right? Maybe I'm using bridge financing because I'm a fix and flipper, so I don't ever want anything long term. Or maybe, hey, maybe I'm a little bit more of a hybrid person, so I want to see what options I have to take on, let's say, a 1-year mortgage, but that could also be 30 years. And that's what we can provide within our debt service mortgages, right? So understanding your strategy is really what's going to help define the best way to go about it. Now, the last thing we have on the list is cash purchases and then adding the leverage, right? So this is more for the investors that have the ability to close on the property, right? But they don't want to use all their money on this one asset, right? I have enough money to put down, let's say, 3 or 4 different down payments on 3 or 4 different properties. Why should I spend all of my capital on one deal and put all of my eggs in one basket? And now I'm just risking everything. Well, you don't have to, right? The way that would work is as simple as you purchasing the property and coming back to Express Capital Financing and saying, hey, by the way, now I own this asset. I would like to go ahead and get leverage on it so that I could go ahead and put down another 2 or 3 deposits on my next purchases. And that's something that we're going to dive into very deeply about and explain how to go about it, what you should be aware of to ensure that you will be able to leverage that asset and how to do the right due diligence and making sure that the numbers make sense, right? So just because it says that it's cash only, it does not mean that you need to come in with all the cash on that deal all the time, right? Sometimes you will, and you'll get it back right afterwards. And sometimes we'll be able to look at a way to get it done right there on that purchase where you don't even have to worry about it. You could close on 2 or 3 the same week.
Yeah, there's so many options available today, and Express Capital has all of them. So, yeah, like the way to really be a successful real estate investor is to leverage, 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 because that gets you into more deals. Like if you can do 3 or 4 and make money on 3 or 4 at the same time, like Max was saying, why just make money on one property when you can make money on 4? So there's some amazing options, and again, we do want to get much deeper into how that financing works, because if you want to get on the courthouse steps and you do have to front all that cash, it'd be really great to get some leverage on it and go do it again next week. So
100%. And just to add in there a little bit more, just to catch one more thing, a lot of times I'll get, oh yeah, but if I finance it, it's going to cost me money, right? It's going to cost me interest payments. It's going to cost me closing costs and things of that nature. And I'd love to just elaborate a little bit more on how this works. So yes, I'm just going to take for simple math. If I had a property, let's say that if I use my own cash, I can make $50,000 today on that asset, right? Whereas if I went ahead and financed it, maybe I'll make 40 or 35, even if you want to call it. But I made 40 or 35, but now I get to do 2, 3, or 4 deals, right? So if I do 3 deals at 45, I am way ahead of you. I just made $130,000, $35,000 as opposed to what you could have made, which was 50, right? So your money is going to work harder for you, and your cash on cash return is what we're focused on here, right? We're not focused on a simple profit. That's small minded. We want to be big minded and look at the big picture. How can we make our money make the most amount of money for us and go further for us, right? And now you got 3 or 4. Now that could be 6 or 8, right? So it's a constant growth process. And the further you want to take this, the further this leverage will allow you to go.
And don't forget, I mean, if you are only able to buy one property but don't have all the money, you still can just buy one property, right? So
yeah,
we don't want to forget about that, because we only sell them one at a time. So
that's true.
And most of these properties are going to need some rehab on them. That's what ends up in a lot of the online auctions, especially if they're bank-owned properties or foreclosure properties. So, all right, let's jump into bidding strategies, because this is where I get excited, because I am an auction addict. I'm such an auction addict. I'm actually a licensed auctioneer. But there's a couple of different ways to bid in auctions, and people employ different strategies, right? So I mentioned earlier that the auctions last 7 days on Hubzu, and if they don't sell, like there isn't a high bidder or the reserve's not met, then the auction starts over again, right? And when you're saving a property on Hubzu, we'll remind you every week that that property is coming back to auction. But some people like to place their bid early and place their highest and best, so that that $73,000 property we saw, someone might bid $110,000, but the bid will be kind of like an eBay style bid on Hubzu, where it places at 73, and if someone bids 74, you'll bid 75, and we place those bids in the increments for you on your behalf up until we reach your highest bid, and then you become outbid. And then other people, they like to do a jump bid, where it's 73,000 and they just place a bid at 110,000 because they want to like draw a line in the sand and say, if you want to outbid me, you got to start higher, right? We don't have a lot of those on Hubzu, but there are properties that will have jump bids on them as well. And then everyone loves to do the snipe bidding, right? That's when you come in at the very last second and you place a bid and you're like, I got you, right? But in real estate auctions, I haven't seen one where you can do that. We always extend the bidding, and it can be from a couple of minutes to 10 or 20 minutes, depending on the value of that property. And so if you place a last minute bid, let's say I placed 110 earlier in the week, and you come in and place 111 with 3 seconds left, right? It's going to add 3 or 4 minutes to that auction, or it depends. The auctioneer that's running the auction can determine what that duration is, whether it's 60 seconds, because there's a lot of people that are placing last minute bids, or it's 3 or 4 minutes on a higher value property, because you want people to get a little time to crunch some numbers when they're spending a lot of money on the property. So sniping doesn't really work unless your competing bidders aren't watching the end of the auction. Then it does work, because 3 minutes isn't enough time to pull over your car and try and figure out how to place a last minute bid because you weren't paying attention. So that's another tip that I didn't even put on here, is that you should always be watching the end of the auction to see where the bidding's at, because you might want to place a bid competitively at the very end. A secret. I thought this is a great bidding secret. Almost all auctions are reserve auctions. So that means the seller has set a minimum price that they'll accept in that auction. But you can still win if you don't bid that amount. Because as an auctioneer, like, we're here to try and make a deal, right? And so if somebody wanted to, in that property I was talking about at 110,000, if the seller's reserve was 120, at that point the reserve isn't met at 110 or 111 or 112. But the auctioneer can say, we're going to sell that property subject to seller confirmation, and we'll have you sign the purchase and sale agreements. And then we'll go to the seller and say, hey, we had a bid of 113,000. Do you want to take it? And oftentimes the seller says yes. And sometimes the auctioneer actually has what's called delegated authority, and we as the auctioneer can accept it below that reserve amount too. So there's some back end things that can get you an even better deal than you would thought you could, because your bid is below that high amount. So if your maximum is 113,000 on this property, you've done the work, you've talked to Express Capital and said, like, this is my plan, I'm not going to bid over 113, and you're really bummed about that, the seller could still accept that number, and they might even come back and say, hey, I want 120, and you can say, no, it's 113, and then they could take that number as well, and the auction is ended, and you're the winning bidder, and you go under contract. So that's a great secret to know, that you do your numbers and you can stick to them. And that also helps you from getting a little emotional in the auction and outbidding yourself, what you should be doing financially. Closing process. This is where all the paperwork happens. This is the more painful part. The fun part's bidding in the auction, right? But this is where after the auction you have to do an earnest money deposit. It's usually 5% of the amount, or it can change by property. It'll say on the property page on Hubzu what that earnest money deposit has to be, like 5,000 or 5%, whichever's more. Sometimes it's $3,500. You have to sign the purchase and sale agreement. It's a DocuSign that comes in your mail. You can click it. It's very simple to do. The seller has to confirm that they're going to sign that contract as well. And once they do, you go into escrow just like with any other property, and you do your funding. And if you're paying all cash and adding the leverage later with Express Capital, that's where you make that determination, or you work with them and set a closing date with the seller, with the escrow title company, and arrange that bridge loan in advance, or a DSCR loan, or however you guys are working together on that. At Hubzu, we're happy to take the money any way it comes in. So once it's funded, the closing docs go out, and if it's an occupied property, you're going to have to get the occupancy of that property, and sometimes that takes eviction, sometimes it takes a knock on the door, sometimes it takes a letter from a lawyer. There's a bunch of different ways. Sometimes the person is just, they say, someone bought my house, I got to go. A lot of investors like to do something called cash for keys, where they knock on the door and say, hey, I buy your house, you got to go. They're usually not the best tenant. Sometimes you'll find a tenant that was in that property and you bought it off a former landlord, and they might be a great tenant, and you could just start renting it to them right then. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. But you have to get occupancy of that property yourself. And one of our last tips here is you definitely want to check local laws regarding eviction. There's some places where it could take a year or two to get someone out of that property. In some places in New Jersey and New York, it can take a long time. You need to work with some professionals to help you get those people out. And so you want to think about these things in advance before you're bidding, right? There's also redemption states where if someone got foreclosed on last month and you're buying it after the foreclosure sale, like in Minnesota and Michigan, there's a 6-month right of redemption, up to a year if it's a homestead property. And a lot of those will be homestead properties, so you have to let them live in it for a year. So you got to calculate that into your financial formula as well. So know those laws in your local states, and that's just part of the due diligence process that you want to know in advance. So there's a tip there. And then That's really, how you can find properties in online auctions and bid on foreclosures and bank-owned properties and use Hubzu.com and work with Express Capital Financing. But these are the upcoming webinars we have, and like I said at the very beginning, if you are watching this, sometime after November 2022, some of these might already be recorded, and you can watch them on demand. But we're going to talk about non-performing loans versus foreclosure properties versus REOs versus what we call signature seller properties on Hubzu. That's where those wholesaler properties I was talking about, or an investor or homeowner selling their own home in the auction. We have a topic on HUD in particular, CWCOT, claim without a conveyance of title, what it is and how to buy those homes. Trust me, the government does not want to own anybody's house, right? So that'll be very enlightening. And there's various ways that you can finance those properties as well. Bridge lending, which will be a great one that Express Capital goes deep into, and I like to call it like why hard money lending is so easy, right? Everyone used to call it hard money lending, but it really isn't hard. It's a lot easier than conventional lending, actually. We're going to do one. This will be live, so you might not be able to watch this one on demand. We're going to go into Hubzu and we're going to pick 4 different properties, maybe 5, the best investment properties at that time, and we're going to dive deep. We're going to do all the due diligence for you. We're going to give you all the financing options, what it's going to cost, what the high amount you should bid on those properties are. The data team at Hubzu is going to say these are the best properties you can bid on the site right now. And so that'll be enlightening. You have to attend that one in person, and we'll probably have some of these recommendations for these other ones too if you attend them live. That won't be in the on-demand version because they'll be out of date. And then remote investing, data-driven decisions to expand your portfolio. And even if that portfolio is going from 0 to 1 property, my first purchase as a real estate investor, I bought it about 10 minutes from my house that I lived in because I was going to do the work on it. I was going to manage it myself. But my second investment property I bought in North Carolina. So I went from California to the other side of the country, and there's lots of investors that do that. And so we're gonna dive in deep on that, and that's where you need a finance partner, and that's where you need a good property manager and a few other things as well. So we'll talk about that in a future webinar.
And I am so excited for that deal day. That's the webinar that I think is going to bring the most value to all the investors here, because they're going to see everything from how we found the property to how we analyze it to how we decide what we're going to bid on that property.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And so, and if that's a success, and we think it will be, we'll keep doing those. Maybe we'll do them every month, and say, hey, here's the best properties that just hit the market. And some of those might be foreclosure properties, and some of them might be bank-owned properties, and some of them might be wholesaler properties where they found the great deal and they're willing to flip it for an extra 10 grand or something. So there's so many opportunities, and the market's coming back. It's been a dry couple of years. The real estate market was going crazy. Interest rates were super low. Foreclosures, there was moratoriums and all those things. But the foreclosure starts are back. People are starting to get back. The economy, obviously, real estate and interest rates are pretty high right now. But that's another reason that investors have so many opportunities. So we'll dive deep in those other webinars. We hope to see you there. And we hope you enjoyed this one as well. So if you see a place to give it a thumbs up and like it, please do. And we'll be bringing you a lot more content as the months come ahead. And we'll do some of these deal days from time to time too, where we do all the work for you and you just click the mouse. So anything else, Jonathan?
Great. Looking forward to it.
We are excited and ready to go.
Thank you, everybody, for joining, and thank you, Mike, for moderating, and Express Capital. This has been really fun today, and we're looking forward to the next series of webinars, and you'll be getting notices from us as we go forward. So everybody, have a great day. Thank you so much.
You too. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.